So the predictive model in the national economy, I kind of shortened the title. So here we're looking at what the predictive model is, and we're using the national economy of Nigeria as a case study. All right, so quickly, we are going to have like 5 different sections in this talk. First, we're looking at what is predictive modeling, some of its applications, how the predictive model works. Then we're looking at the national economy, and then we're making our conclusions from what we've learned so far. Okay, first up, let's start with what is predictive modeling. I know we all have smartphones, and then there's something that usually pops up on our screen every now and then telling us something like, oh, 32 degrees Celsius or X degrees Fahrenheit wherever you are. So for example, I have an image on my screen here showing me the temperature for tomorrow in Akure, and here I can see 32 degrees centigrade in Akure, that is tomorrow. Okay, so this is an example of what prediction is. Tomorrow is not yet here, but we already have an idea of how the weather tomorrow is going to be like. So if I'm going out tomorrow or I want to make a journey tomorrow, I can say, oh, it's going to be rainy or it's going to be sunny. So this is how I should prepare. This is how I should pack my bags for tomorrow. This is what I should wear. This is what I should go out with. That's just like a practical example of what predictive modeling is. So for theory, predictive modeling or analytics is basically a technique that's used to predict the future events or outcomes by analyzing patterns in a set of past data. Basically what we're saying here is you have historical data about something, and then you want to know, okay, this is what has happened in the past, what is going to happen in the future. The same thing works for this weather forecast I have here. So we know, okay, this is how Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday has been. And even more than this past 5 days, there are historical data for years about the weather in Akure. So this is how it has been. And we now, based on this data that we have from probably 1960 or from probably 1980, can we now predict what is going to happen tomorrow based on this past data that we have? So next up, let's see some applications of predictive modeling. Yes, it's not only used in weather forecasting, it's also used in advertising. You know, when you, for example, you search something on Google, you probably search, oh, how to become a data scientist. Then you read about 6 or 7 articles, and then you open your Twitter the following day, and then you're seeing a Udemy promo course on your Twitter home screen, or you're seeing a data camp promo course in your email, something like that, and you're wondering, oh, how did they know that I want to probably start a career in data science or something? It's prediction. They've already been able to predict. Okay. Someone talking to me? Okay, so they've already been able to predict that, oh, you've searched a lot about starting out in data science, and probably these courses will help you start out in data science. So that's how it's used in advertising. Then we have also seen weather forecasting. I've already explained that. Then we're looking at economic forecasting, and this is like one of the major things we'll be talking about later on, in looking at the national economy. Then fraud detection. So how do you think that systems can detect that, oh, this transaction is fraudulent and this transaction isn't fraudulent? Or spam detection. How do you think that sometimes your Gmail is going to ask you, oh, is this thing spam? Or they automatically move an email to spam for you, and then you can remove it from there if it's not spam. So this is all about prediction. They're predicting that, oh, from the content of this thing, it looks like spam to you because this is not your usual way of doing things. These are not the kind of topics you read. These are not the kind of sites you go to. So it's usually very new. Or is someone trying to spam you for this kind of thing? So that is an application of predictive modeling. Now let's look at how does it work. We looked at how it can be applied, and we're looking at examples. So how does predictive model work? So first I said define the objective. And when I say define the objective, I mean define the objective of what you want to work with or your business problem. So for this course, for this session, we're looking at basically looking at the national economy. So let's define an objective around this. Let's say we want to look at the unemployment ratio in Nigeria, for example. So we've defined an objective already. We want to look at how we can combat unemployment in Nigeria. And trust me, they have past data about unemployment in Nigeria since the inception of unemployment in Nigeria. So we've already been able to define an objective. We've been able to find a problem that was okay. The problem we're looking at is unemployment. And the objective around this, we want to be able to combat unemployment in Nigeria. Let's say by 2030, we want to have reduced the percentage of unemployed youth by 40%. We've been able to define an objective. So after defining the objective, the next thing we are going to look at is selecting the data. If we're trying to work around unemployment, we cannot go and look for data about inflation. We cannot go and look. Inflation may be a secondary data to what we need, but it's not going to be our primary source of data. If we're talking about unemployment, we cannot go and start looking for data about entertainment industry, about Burna Boy's music, about Davido's music. That is very irrelevant. So since we've been able to scope our problem and define our objective, this will give us an idea of the kind of data that we need to work for this objective. Then after selecting your data and getting everything right, next step is we can then go to prepare and analyze the data. So what do I mean by preparing and analyzing the data? In real life, when you collect data, it's usually messy. So let's say you collected your data from a survey or something, there are going to be inconsistencies in this data. Not everybody's going to answer your question. Not everybody's going to answer the question in the same way. Some people are going to use text, and are going to use numbers. So how do you cater for these inconsistencies in your data? How do you transform your data? How do you clean your data? Because the computer is not going to understand data that is incomplete and is not clean. Even though it understands it, it's going to give you a very wrong output because it's like garbage in, garbage out. It's basically what you give to it that it's going to return to you. So that is just how it works. And I don't know how to get this off my screen. Okay, I think that works. Okay, so after being able to prepare your data, the next thing you're going to do is analyze it. So before you can even begin to model and so let's predict what will happen in the future, we have to do some basic analysis. We are talking about you making findings, and here you can see I had a chart to explain something. So you can just, okay, let's see what is going on in our data set. How are the variables interacting with each other? How are the variables working with each other? How are they depending on each other, or how are they not depending on each other? How are they working together? Any patterns, any trend? What can we see? And then after looking at these things in the data, I say visuals always speak, like one visualization can speak 1,000 words. So behind just one visualization, what you would have said in 1,000 words, you can say it in one visual. So visualize the data, understand what's going on there. So after making these primary findings, you can then go on to select the model and build. And when we're talking about predictive modeling, there are quite a number of models that you can work with. You can work with either classification models, depending on what you're trying to do. You can work with clustering models. You can work with outlier models. You can work with time series models. You can work with different kind of models actually. And I think the last kind of model you can work with is forecasting models. Yeah, basically what we're trying to do here. So we're trying to predict like unemployment ratio in the next few years, and we're trying to see how we can tackle that through other things. That's basically how it works. So you can either be trying to classify, you're trying to say, okay, yes or no. Is this, or it's not this? Is this a cat or a dog? It's either it's a cat or it's a dog. It cannot be both. So when you're trying to clustering works very well in our advertising example. So they cannot, let me put this straight. So when you're trying to cluster, there are quite a number of people that a particular company will recommend the same product to. It's because they've been able to categorize you in a particular cluster. All of you may not have the same needs, all of you may not have the same capacity, but there's something that brings you all together. So you've been able to be clustered in that particular segment. Probably, let's say, pregnant women. All of you might not be the same age. All of you might not be first-time mothers. All of you might not even be pregnant or might not even want to keep the pregnancy. But they have seen that you need some pregnancy kits or pregnancy tools to aid you through the process of either giving birth to the child or aborting or anything like that. So that's what like clustering is all about. Then when we talk about time series analysis, you're trying to, okay, just like what we're trying to do here, for the weather forecasting is basically a time series analysis. So on Sunday next week, what is going to happen? So we're looking at the time on Sunday, and we're saying, okay, on Sunday by 3 p.m. there'll be rainfall. On Sunday by 7 p.m. there'll be thunderstorm. On Sunday by 9 p.m. there'll be sunshine, for example. So that is looking at, okay, time series analysis. We're trying to analyze the timing of a particular period. And then forecasting, I've already explained that. And then I think the last one we have is outlier. So outlier models basically help you understand anomalies in your data. So like I said, every data we collect is not perfect. There are going to be anomalies, and not every time you have to remove your outlier. Sometimes anomalies tell you more about your data than you can actually think about. So when you see an outlier, try to understand and investigate the outlier. Why does this data point exist? And when I say outlier, I mean a data point that is extremely different from other data points you have. So after being able to select a particular model based on your business objective or the problem you're trying to solve, you can then build the model. And then we are all Nigerians here, or if you're not a Nigerian, but then human beings by nature, we like to test whatever we buy. We are like, oh, I bought this thing, let me test and see how it works. So the same thing works for your model. After building your model, you try to test and evaluate the model. How well is the model performing? This is where you now begin to understand if it is performing based on the way you want it to be, or there's something wrong. And if there's something wrong, you can always go back to iterate and see where the problem came from. Did it come from your data? Did it come from your analysis? Or did it come from the kind of model that you built? That is basically how the whole predictive modeling works in a summary. So now let's take a look at the national economy. So economic forecasting is basically a process of attempting to predict the future condition of an economy. For example, Nigeria's economy. And you're going to be using a combination of important indicators such as inflation, industrial production, unemployment rate, GDP, a lot of things like that, where you're trying to predict the economy of a nation. So to make us understand this, I think I have two charts from Trading Economics. And this is a chart showing Nigeria's GDP over the years. So here we can see Nigeria's GDP in, sorry, I didn't label this chart very well. This is in billions of dollars. So we can see this year, we have $45 billion as of 2012, and we have this all the way down here to 2020. 2021 and 2022 were a prediction as at the time this chart was created. The time this chart was created, there was data for only up to 2020. So 2021 and 2022 were all predictions of how Nigeria's GDP is going to look like. And they were able to make these predictions based on the data that has been collected since 1960. Now you can see here there's a lot of spike in 2014. There's a reduction in GDP in 2015. And it's like we went to the worst stage of our lives in 2017. It gradually began to rise up in 2019, fell again in 2020 with a little increase in 2021. And I would like to tell you that this prediction is actually really correct. So at 2020, Nigeria's GDP was $43.2 billion. And in 2021, it was about 44 point something billion dollars. And if you look at this chart, I think that is going to make a lot of sense because it is way above 43 and is very close to $45 billion. So that's how that was. If you check online, Google search it, Nigeria's GDP as of 2021. This is an example of how prediction was used in GDP. And then they even went further to make a lot of predictions for the next years to 2028. You can see how the curve is. So here is showing that our GDP is going to keep rising, but it's going to keep rising at very tiny percentages. So that is like what the predictions have shown here. So how can this data now be useful to the government, useful to you as a Nigerian? How can this prediction of a national economy help? So I came here to conclude and say, okay, predictive modeling helps in the national economy, strategic planning. So we've already been able to predict that, oh, this is how 2023 is going to be like. The government can start planning strategically for what are the things we are going to put in place for 2023 that we can even increase our GDP above this level? What are the kind of, then it helps in decision making. What kind of decisions do we have to take to the indicators of our GDP? What kind of decisions do we have to take in unemployment? What kind of decisions do we have to take to combat inflation? What kind of decisions do we have to take in production, in the production sector of the economy? What kind of decisions do we have to take in a lot of sectors of the economy? This is how it can help the nation. And then it can also help the nation to tackle economic issues, just like I said about inflation, for example. So you can look into the past data of where we had serious inflation and how did we get out of that inflation. So you can begin to tackle such issues using historical data and predict for the future to save ourselves stress in the future. We see that, something like this might arise again in the future. We can easily prepare, plan for it, make decisions surrounding it. And when it eventually comes, we'll be able to tackle such problems. So this is basically how predictive modeling works, looking at the national economy. And it works almost the same way based on your business objective or whatever problem you're trying to solve in other sectors of data science or other sectors of life generally. You can apply it everywhere. You saw an example of advertising, fraud detection, spam detection. You can basically use a predictive model any and everywhere once you want to know what's going to happen in the future. And I think the future is something we are uncertain about. So the predictive model helps us create a kind of mental picture that tells us, although you are uncertain about the future, but this is what it might look like. So you can begin to plan on ahead. So I think with that, I've come to the end of a brief introduction to the predictive model. So I would welcome to answer your questions in the chat or any other thing you have to say. Thank you.